Now, this approach will work. Actually, it won't work because I've mistyped the title. That should have been visited this year, because it has to correspond exactly with the text that appears on the button's label. And that's the problem, really. What we've done here is we've hard-coded a dependency on the actual text that happens to appear on the button in the user interface, and that's always bad practice. What could happen when this application goes through testing, somebody might suggest that, oh, let's change the label on this button to be something a bit shorter, or let's change it to be French or German. And as soon as we change any of the text on these button controls, it's going to completely ruin the logic in our code. So having a statement that explicitly depends on the text that happens to be on the button control is always a bad idea. So what do we do? Well, luckily for us, there is a mechanism which enables us to check which button was clicked that doesn't depend on its user interface. So for example, if I click the first button and have a look at its properties, as well as having a text property, which is the user interface text, there's also a property called command name. And this is, if you like, the logical name for the command, as opposed to the label that happens to appear on the user interface. This is more like a programmatic name that represents the button. So I could choose a name such as this year command for that button. And then for the other button, I can choose a command name such as last year command. And then if I go back to my code behind, I can now modify the logic so that it checks not the text property, but the command name property. And that's much better. Okay, so there we are. So we're checking which button was clicked via the command name property rather than checking the text. So I think at this stage, we need to run the application and see that it works and that it compiles. One of those days, let's have a look what the errors are. Use of unassigned local variable year message. So this is ASP.NET. Well, to be more precise, it's the C# compiler being my friend. What it's complaining about here is I have a local variable called yearMessage, and although I've set the value for it in this branch, and I've set the value for it in this branch, it is possible that both of these if tests fail, in which case this variable will be unassigned. So I need to just give it a simple initialize value at the beginning. So let's just assign it the value string.empty. That's an empty string. Okay, let's try to compile it again and see what happens. Okay, so let's type in a name, Colin, that's my father, and Colin visited France actually this year on a skiing trip. So let's say this year Colin visited France, and let's also put in my brother's name, Nigel, and Nigel visited, I'm not sure where Nigel visited, let's say Nigel visited Canada and Germany last year. There we are, so that's all working marvellous. So let's close the window. And we're pretty much finished with this example. I'll just summarize what we've achieved in this example. Basically, we've had a good look at the page processing model. We've seen how ASP.NET initializes the controls that make up our web page using a variety of mechanisms. First of all, it sets default values according to the markup that we have in our web page. And then also, it uses viewState and a combination of initialization methods to enable us to perform subsequent initialization for our controls. We've also had a look at how you can handle multiple events using the same event handler. And finally, we've seen how to handle some additional events on a page class. We've seen the importance of the pre-render event for tidying up controls just before they're rendered. And we've seen the importance of the on-unload event for discarding objects and data that we no longer need at the end of the web page. Okay, so that's the end of that example. So I'm going to close Visual Studio